Hi everyone, it's September and today I thought I would talk about suicide specifically because it's Suicide Awareness Month and I want to be really intentional with doing my part to build awareness. So it's Sheva and I'm here to help you, help your loved ones, and also to help yourself through times of perhaps emotional distress and for the person that you're caring for, perhaps their thoughts of suicide. So, to talk about suicide, I would like to start by addressing the myth that, Sheva, we shouldn't talk about it because the more we talk about it, the bigger the issue is or it becomes. Now, I can see where you're coming from for that because typically when you start talking about an issue, a lot of stuff starts to come to surface. You know, when you're down and out and that person comes over and says, "Are you okay?" And then you start bawling because you're not okay. But this isn't the case with suicide in regards to when you bring the word up and you say suicide, you're not bringing up the idea or thoughts of suicide, which is something I often get asked because people are afraid that if they say something about suicide, it's putting the thought in their head. And I'd like to dismantle that belief right now. So, people know that suicide is an issue. The youngest suicide that has been recorded is a 5-year-old. If a 5-year-old, in some capacity, is aware that suicide is an option, then the likelihood that everybody else knows is really great. So if you are noticing something which causes you some distress or alarm about someone you love, and there's a reason why you're concerned, then it's important not to hesitate or shy away from the topic of suicide. And I want to make this clear because when you shy away or think, well, I'm just going to ask a lot of questions, I'm just going to talk and dig deep and find out what the issue is, it's because we're uncomfortable with bringing up suicide. And that's fine in terms of our own growth. But if you really want to meet the person with thoughts of suicide, you want to meet them where they're at, then you have to put it on the table because it is such a heavy, intense topic that people won't put that on the table when they're struggling. It's full of shame for them. It's not something they're proud of. The topic continues to be stigmatized. And so as helpers, as caregivers, we need to be the ones that put it on the table and say, hey, is this what's going on? We need to have a chat about this, and I'm grounded enough to have that chat with you. So that's one thing that I want to dispel in terms of the myths about suicide. By talking about it, you are not planting an idea or thought in the brain of the person that you're trying to help and care for. The other idea is this, that suicide is contagious, right? And you're like, what are you talking about, Sheva? But think about it this way, right? If you had a kid and the kid comes home one day and says, hey, mom, dad, or uncle, or, didi or baya, or whoever the person is to you, and says, hey, one of my friends was talking about killing themselves and suicide. I bet you that after comforting and talking to her about it and leaving space for discussion because you're a great helper, you probably are going to have the urge, if you don't do it, but you might have the urge to tell your son or daughter, do you have any other friends that you could hang out with? Maybe stay away from this one. Because you're afraid that this will become something that will spread amongst people that are more vulnerable, perhaps. The idea comes from the fact that after a suicide has happened in a place, we do see copycats. We do see people who follow through, perhaps in the same way or something similar along to what was perhaps publicized. That is fact. But I think the reasons that we jump to in terms of the conclusion is that, this is just copycats. And so they see somebody do it and they're like, well, they did it. Why can't I do it? And there is value to that. However, when you look at how we engage as human beings and the psychology behind how we function, we do something called social proofing. And social proofing is this idea that when you're trying to figure out what your next steps are, what you're going to do, you often look around to people who are in your area going to be making similar choices. So you look to your peer group, you look to your colleagues to try to figure out what's normal. That's called social proofing. And so what we need to do is we need to use this concept of social proofing to actually look at issues of seeking help. So let's normalize that, right? If people are hesitant perhaps to think, well, I'm not going to plaster all these suicide numbers across my school, I'm not going to do that. That's going to make all the teenagers think about suicide. That's fair. You don't want to erupt conversations where perhaps there are none to start with. That said, you could plaster the school with things like, hey, big questions about life, or come get some group hangout time with adults, or something. I know it's going to be hard to get teenagers on board with that, but what I'm saying is we need to normalize a culture where seeking help, leaning on people, having mentorship available, talking to people whose opinions you love and trust, that becomes the norm. So I hope that I've been able to present these ideas in such a way that maybe just cause a pause to think about, why are we so hesitant? And when we continue to be hesitant to talk about these issues and put them on the table, it further stigmatizes and validates the shame that people feel in thinking about this, in talking about it. And what shame does is it isolates people, it disconnects people, thus furthering their vulnerability in such a situation. So don't be afraid to talk about suicide. Make it a conversation. If you want to know how I talk about it in my home, I have 2 boys, for instance, and my youngest one, I used to walk with him to school, and then I'd jump on the train for one of my workshops, and I would be, dressed formally with my little rolly bag, and he would say, "Mama, where are you going?" And so when my oldest was about 8, I told him, well, I do workshops that are about people wanting to kill themselves and finding no reason to live. So I help people help other people through such issues. And he took it in, he asked a few more questions, and I told him the answers, and then we moved on with the day. I didn't go into it unless he was pressing me with a few more questions, and he did. Shortly after that, I don't remember the exact time, maybe a few months, I want to say, he came to me and he's like, "Mama, there was a kid in my school in grade 6 who was clutching his neck and was saying he wanted to throw himself off the school roof. Is that the work you do?" And thanks to this conversation, I could reach out to the school and let them know who this child was and, how they could find support for him. Now my other kid, same conversation, same age, walking to school. He asked me questions and I started to talk to him about it. And after I said, well, this is the workshop I do, he said, "Oh, cool. So in Minecraft, do you know that I can make a functioning bathtub?" So clearly he was done with that topic. And that was fine, because you don't want to bombard children with information that they may not be ready for, but you do want to start being open, being honest, and putting subjects out there that potentially could be something of value for them down the line. I've got 2 boys, and statistically speaking, they are in the higher probability group for suicide. And I'm not going to take the chance to stigmatize that topic. All right. I hope that helps you with some of your thinking. And shoot some questions my way if you've got them.